Coming in at number 10 is The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. I think for most gamers, we're pretty familiar with this introduction scene here. At least if you've been around, gaming for a while and, have some interest in Nintendo games. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time originally came out on the Nintendo 64 in 1998. Again, another game in that great year. And as it stands right now, the last time I have looked and all, this is considered the highest rated game on, for example, like sites like Metacritic. I don't think, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's still the highest rated game, and I think it holds like a 99, I think, percent on there, and I mean, I really don't ever see that being toppled at any point. Now, granted, from my understanding, because that just takes like a bunch of critic reviews and gives out an average, right? So kind of like Rotten Tomatoes for movies. And so, that was it was a different time, and then also there wasn't as many reviewers and all I want to say back then as there is now. So, there more reviews, you're just going to potentially have more negative reviews. So that could have put, say like if it was being scored by today's standards, it would probably be a little bit lower. But regardless, though, because of that, it is still considered probably one of the, if not the best game of all time. And a lot of that, yes, it is nostalgia, right? And all, and I don't say that just for me, right? I'm just kind of talking about the, industry as a whole, that this game has held that pedigree of a title because of the huge impact this game had when it first came out back then. So, the Nintendo 64 was a system that it ultimately just could not compete against the juggernaut that was the PlayStation. And Nintendo found themselves in a bit of a predicament there where, they weren't the number one kid on the block anymore. And so they made some choices with the Nintendo 64 going to the cartridge format and all, and which ultimately hurt them in the long run. But what can't be denied, though, is some of the ultimately game-changing classics that the system came out with Super Mario 64, GoldenEye, and this one here particularly, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. And this game influenced so much in the industry and all that it's just hard to deny the overall impact again that this game had. And so it's an action RPG. I mean, it very much, when it comes down to it, it's very much almost like a Link to the Past, only in 3D, where you start off in a hub, so to speak, and then you visit a town or visit dungeons. In said dungeons, you find items to help you progress through it, and then also it opens up certain parts in the main overworld map and all, to help you continue moving forward. And then in the dungeons, you fight a certain boss until you get to the last part. So all of that is more or less the same, only in a 3D form, right? And back then, when the fifth generation came out, and this generation gets criticized a lot because of, a lot of the games just haven't held up that well graphically. I mean, you're looking at this here and all, and yes, things look a little blocky, a little washed out, and the detail is pretty sparse now. And so, like just the logo there of The Legend of Zelda looks very blurry and all, but and this is still, it's like I've said before, is nostalgia sometimes can be a very powerful tool, and it can be a very deceiving tool in some cases. But no matter what, though, whenever I come back to this game here, and a lot of games in that generation too, I can still appreciate what they were trying to do at that time, and still take myself back there, and still be amazed by this. We were given an open, what was considered at the time like a more open world here, where we can explore Hyrule, which is something that we would have always wanted to do back then as kids. We'll say like something with a Link to the Past and all, but now we can go in this 3D space and all, and it has all these cool little secrets here and there, and it was just such a fun experience to get lost in this in Hyrule in this 3D version. And what I thought that they did really well here is you get the overworld of Hyrule, which back then was huge, right? I mean, it's a little small now, but the overworld map. But back then it seemed really huge, and there was a lot of different secrets layered throughout. So I feel like a lot of the best games that had a bit more of an open map is that you're layering the area that you're playing in with a bunch of cool stuff to interact with, whether if it's combat, finding new treasures, or just something that you can do in it, and it's just not just open space that has nothing in there. And I think that the Ocarina of Time did that for the most part pretty well. There is a lot of open space, but there is a lot of cool collectibles or secrets that you can find throughout the level. I mean, it's not quite like A Link to the Past where it seemed like every little section of that map was just something. This one, there is some empty spaces and all, but given that it was their first venture into 3D with this series, and getting used to just making 3D games in general, how good they got it this time out is really amazing. Because for a while the formula of Zelda didn't really change a whole lot after this, at least in the 3D realm. And it wasn't until something like Breath of the Wild that changed things up a lot. And it's just because it was a damn good formula. The little story that it has, it's very, I mean, it's very whimsical. It's engaging enough that it's going to keep you hooked right and all, to want to keep progressing on. It's nothing any groundbreaking and all, right, but it's fine enough. But just all the little challenges that you have in the game, and then just trying to go through the dungeons, and are just some of the, even to this day, I still feel are some of the best designed dungeons ever, and they're so fun to go through and try to solve them. And you get the nice reward of not only finding an item there that is not only going to help you in the dungeon, but then going forward in the game, but also the boss fights too, which are very fun to try to figure out how to defeat. And it just made for something that you feel so caught up in this world here that you almost don't want to leave it, just because it's so fun playing in this playground. And it's the Z targeting that they created in this. I mean, it seems very obvious now, but back then, again, they were trying to figure out how to do 3D games, and that is something that this game innovated on. And eventually someone would have probably figured it out, that you press a button to lock onto your enemy so you can fight them. But it was all very revolutionary back then, and it definitely takes me back to that time and all, the more simpler time. And the game was pretty grand in scope back then, and I didn't play it right away, actually. A little bit of history on me in this game is, so I didn't have the Nintendo 64 growing up. It wasn't until, let's see, I would have got the Nintendo 64 sometime in late 1999. And I was living in an apartment, and at the time I would, anybody around me, I would have been the only one interested in the Nintendo 64. And so I went out and bought a used copy, and I got it just specifically for this game, because the game had already been out in year, and it was getting a bunch of really good reviews. And also I was just thinking to myself, I was like, I gotta play this game at some point. And so I was an adult now. And so it was the first Nintendo system that I had bought for myself. Right. And I got it because of this game right here. I think I rented a handful of games for the Nintendo 64 afterwards, or maybe I bought some for cheap. Like, I remember Wave Race, I did buy that, and which is also on my top 100 list. But this one here is, I wanted to play it so bad, and I would play this game in my room, and because again, I was living with some roommates at the time, and the TV that we had out in the living room and whatever game system we had would have either been the PlayStation or the Dreamcast. Possibly the Saturn, I'm not quite sure. Because again, nobody was interested in the Nintendo 64 of the people that I was hanging around with at the time. And so I just kept this in my room, and I would go in there every now and then to play it. And eventually every now and then became more and more, because I just got so absorbed in this world. And at the time I was living in a different place, and also didn't have a whole lot of friends or anything. And it was just... some games just come out at a certain time and all that you can get lost in, and all where your real life is pretend maybe not as exciting. But yeah, it was definitely, I was happy to experience this game, because it was the first time also that I really got into a Zelda game, because I had played a little bit here and there of the previous ones, like I talked about in the with the original Legend of Zelda. So this is again the very first Zelda game that I got really into, and it ended up being, still to this day, my favorite one. And certain things haven't aged as well. Again, the graphics, for example, there's a lot of things about this game actually that are a bit of nuances or nuisance. So, for example, the speed of the text sometimes, as you're just the dialogue in the game, sometimes it can go by really fast, or sometimes it just it's a very slow crawl, so it takes a while, right, to go through just basic dialogue in this game as you're talking to people. And the but that's, I would say that, well, those are probably the main ones that I have. But the graphics one, like I said, I can still appreciate these graphics and all, but the slow dialogue is annoying. But there was a remake of this game on the 3DS that fixes a lot of that and improves the graphics on it and all. And so that's actually my preferred way of playing that game. And it's the only downside is just that it is on a handheld, but even then it's still really cool though. But it has a lot of quality of life improvements on it and all that makes that version my preferred way to play. But Magical Adventure, definitely one of the best games of all time, not only for myself, but just I think with the industry across the board, right? And all, they will probably recognize this as one of the best of all time. And I feel like it deserves that title. I mean, it's a legendary game. And I'm actually kind of excited because just recently I've been finding out that there's a Android port, so like on Android phones or devices, that you can get of this game that has a lot of cool mods to it. That it seems like you can play it in widescreen. It has dual analog support. It you can looks like you can like higher res textures, and I think you can swap in like some of the 3DS game textures into it. I just found this out like literally a few days ago, so I'm kind of excited to try to get that going on one of my Android devices here, and because that might end up being my preferred way to play. So yeah, kind of excited about that there. But The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, you probably knew it was going to be here given the taste of video games that I've had going from the previous entries that I've had. And yeah, it definitely deserves it. It's just a true masterpiece. Coming in at number 9 is Phantasy Star. This game came out, 1998, I guess it says there. Honestly, I kind of forgot. But it came out originally on the Sega Master System. And it was one of the only few RPGs that came out on that system. And Phantasy Star, my gosh, this game, there is just, the nostalgia hits so hard with this one here. And it's, it's not quite my favorite game of all time. Obviously, it's number 9, but it's still pretty high up there. But I would say that as far as like what got me into video games, why I love video games so much, and everything that I've talked about on this list, is if I've been gushing about certain games and all that, I owe it to this one right here. When I first played this game, and it was I didn't own this game as a kid. It was a cousin, so this cousin that I've talked about before, right? That he had the Sega Master System and Genesis also, and it introduced me to the friend that had Phantasy Star 2 and all that. So he had a copy of this game, and so we would visit each other almost every weekend. And it seemed like every single time that I would go over there, if I didn't have it already, I was asking to borrow this game, and I just fell in love with the concept of a game that isn't just like a platform or anything, that it has a story, that you're fighting enemies, and the setting to it and all was just, to me, just a very cool experience, and I couldn't get enough of it. And so this is sort of what led me down the path of really liking RPGs and so forth. And I mean, I spent hours and hours and hours on this game playing it, and I could not get enough of it and all. And just the overall story, the Algo Star solar system that this game takes place in, which is very imaginative and creative. And my imagination as a kid at the time, so I would have been 8, 9, 10 years old or so when I played this, was just really lit, going through this game where I wanted to create stories, I wanted to draw characters, I wanted to, design video games, because I was just so astounded by what this game was. And, I'm looking at this game still even to this day, and it is just such a gorgeous looking game still, where, the Sega Master System was a little bit more powerful than a Nintendo Entertainment System. The graphics were just much more colorful. Everything, the game, it almost looked was on, in some cases, some games were almost on par with like some 16-bit games. Like this game, for example, in a lot of ways, I feel that it looks better than Part 2. So if you go back to my Part 2, Phantasy Star 2 video, and you come back to this, there might be some instances where you might even think this one looks better. So I was just amazed by all that, and just that there's 3 planets that you can explore, and I just thought it was like the coolest thing. And to its credit also as well, because it wasn't something that was really discussed back then and all, as far as I can recall, and I don't think anybody really cared because we just loved the characters. But it was one of the first major games that had a female protagonist in it as well too, with Alice there. And so basically the game is just that it's a pretty simple story where you're Alice, and so you're basically trying to avenge your brother that was killed by a evil king tyrant called Lassic. And so basically your brother tells you to seek out Odin, who's that dude with the flat top there with the axe, and basically go on a mission to stop him. So there's not a whole lot of story to this game, and there's really not a whole lot of character development either. There's certain story beats where it'll show you like almost like these, just like a still image, very simple cutscenes, and which are really well drawn back, for back then. And but again, there's not a whole lot of story. But I think the magic of this game for me just comes into the world that they created, and that it really makes you believe that you're in this kind of sci-fi / medieval setting, which I really love in this one here. And because future Phantasy Star games started getting a lot more towards the sci-fi side of it, but this one I thought had a very interesting blend of like medieval versus and futuristic stuff. Like you have swords and shields and magic and all that, but at the same time there's laser guns and spaceships and all that you can go to different planets on, and it all works really well in my opinion. But and granted, a lot of this is very much nostalgia, right? I know why I have this game so high, but I will say that I almost visit this game almost every year, and it's just because I love living in this world here and all that. Even with its more simplistic graphics, very sparse storytelling and all, somehow I am still transported to this, well, I guess to kind of quote Star Wars, galaxy far, far away. And because I want to say, I think Algol Star Solar System, I think it's based on a real star solar system, but just obviously not this one, right? But I'm thinking maybe that's why they got the inspiration from it. But yeah, it's, and what was cool too is when I first played this game, and at first I didn't quite get it because I'm 8, 9 years old. I don't know a whole lot, and so this game was just kind of complex for us back then because we weren't really used to it. Oh, and the 3D mazes too also were just very revolutionary. But I got stuck in a certain part early in the game, and there's just something that is, it is a little tricky to figure out, but there was a friend at school in elementary that we would talk about this game because he actually had the Sega, him and his dad. And so one day we were talking about this game, and so he told me how to beat this certain, section. And so then once I figured it out and all, it was just go from there, right? Where I just kept wanting to play until I finally beat this game. And these dungeons are labyrinth. They're very difficult. And I couldn't really beat them on my own. So one of the other fun things that I recall about playing this game is calling Sega. And we would call them to, so what they would do is you would say, hey, I'm stuck on this one section of the game. And so they would send you over a walkthrough with like maps on a graph paper. And I just thought always that was so cool because they would arrive in the mail, about a week later or so. And to me, it was just like a present from Sega, right? That I thought I was like, oh, they sent me something. I think that is so cool. And just kind of made me feel connected to the company and all. So for everyone that had the Nintendo hotline, I had the Sega hotline, all right? But yeah, that was just a cool experience. And even every time I would get this game, or when I would borrow it from my cousins, I remember always reaching out to Sega to get a copy of that walkthrough because I just loved having it. I wish I would have still kept those around. But yeah, they were pretty much necessary because again, this game was just very, very difficult. But yeah, so that's Alice, Noah, Odin, and Mayu. And there is the translation in this game with a bit botched, and I think some of it just had to do with the amount of characters that they can fit on screen. So I think in the Japanese version, so Alice is Alyssa, Noah, which is the one there in the white cape, was Lutz, which is how he's known later on in future games. And then Odin was, I believe, Tyrone. And then Mayu, I believe, was just Mayu also, I believe. But again, it was early times, and we weren't really used to having RPGs over here. But yeah, I mean, if any game just takes me back to my childhood and brings a smile to my face, nothing can do that better than this game right here, Phantasy Star. And for all my love of video games and all that, it started with this one right here, and I owe so much to it. And it just hearing the music, seeing the graphics and all, it just puts a smile on my face. And the most important video game that I've ever played. Coming in at number 8 is Batman Arkham City. This game came out in 2011 and was originally released on the PlayStation 3 and on the Xbox 360, and eventually got a remastered version called Return to Arkham on the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4. The version that I'm playing here is the one on the PlayStation 4 running backwards compatible on the PlayStation 5. As I said before in my Arkham Asylum review, that I am a huge Batman fan, and that game there was just amazing. I really enjoyed Arkham Asylum, but this game here perfected so much of that formula that it was going to become one of my all-time favorites by default, just because it's a very good Batman game. Like I said, it's I love the character and all, and that we were getting good Batman games, now was just something that was like a dream come true. So it takes the same combat that was in part one, which was, like I said in that one, right? They really got the fighting mechanics done to perfection, and the best combat system in a video game that I've ever played. It's just very fast flowing. It's very brutal. It's there's a lot of technique to it and strategy to it, and to get the timing right and all, and the animations and all just really make it feel like you know it's very impactful, when Batman's fighting off a group of thugs here and all, and it really makes you feel that you can take on a group of bad guys, with and hence makes you feel like Batman. But in this game, so you get is the way you use a lot of his gadgets and all, and just gliding through the city here is just very fun. And the way you use your detective skills and all to solve certain puzzles and in certain story elements of the game. I've never played a superhero game where you really felt like, okay, this is they really got the character right and all, and so it makes it just really fun as you're put in the shoes of said superhero. And again, because Batman is my favorite character, this is why this game was just a dream come true and all. And aside from that, you get this more open world structure to an extent. I mean, it's not completely open world, but it's more, you get this big hub of what's called Arkham City. And basically, in this game, what Arkham City is, it's a section of Gotham City that was quarantined out to house some inmates. So it's almost like, think of this like a big prison, so to speak. But things go wrong, obviously, and so now you're Batman trying to stop certain things from happening, I'll say, without, again, spoiling too much. But the story was, for me, I mean, I really liked the story in part one. This one here was a bit improved in some ways, where, first of all, the ending of this game was just excellent, as opposed to kind of the issues that I had with the other one. I really love how they utilize his villains as well too, also, and expanded the rogues gallery a bit more. So now you get to see new faces here in this one, like the Penguin, Catwoman, and some others too as well. And along with the Joker, he still has I'll just say a pretty big role to play in this one. And you get the great performances of Kevin Conroy, Mark Hamill. This time, I believe Tara Strong plays Harley Quinn, and just a lot of other great voice actors too, also to play these iconic characters. The graphics are pretty well done. The original one ran on the Unreal Engine 3, and the remake or remastered, I believe it's Unreal Engine 4. And they both have their pros and cons as far as you know graphically, right? Or like which one is the better one. I do like the lighting and the shadows of this the one that was made on the remastered version. So it's sort of been the one that I normally go to, but I do kind of like the character models though of the original one. So it's kind of like you pick and choose which one you like the most. But either way, I mean, you can't go wrong with either one. And so as you kind of build up your combo meter, you get certain special moves if you've unlocked them, to cause more damage and all. And I'm okay. I do okay as far as like the combat, enough to beat the game and all that. But I'm definitely not a pro at it. But I've seen people like really rack up like crazy combos on this and all, and it's pretty impressive to watch. And so that's what I like about it, is that it's easy enough for you to get into and beat the game and all that. But if you really want to become good at it, it just looks fantastic when you're just going from one bad guy to the next and just almost like a ninja. You're just kicking some ass and all, and it's pretty impressive and all. Just because just trying to get the timing right and all that of making sure that you don't get hit, and doing the counters at the right time and all that. It takes skill, basically, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And so kind of like some of the best games of this style, like adventure games and all, is so the game is sort of like, I guess, like the older Zelda games, like Ocarina of Time, or maybe even like Wind Waker or Twilight Princess, where you have like a hub, and so within this hub, there's areas that you can go to, like hence kind of like your dungeon, so to speak. And what's cool about it, though, so kind of like the best of those games, is that the area that you're playing in, it's pretty big, but it's not overly big, where there's just a bunch of empty space. Wherever you go in Arkham City, you're like, if I push this here and I'm just kind of scanning the area, so anything that is orange is something that you might be able to interact with, or there's something there, right? And so the beauty of it all is that you're never really short on things to try to discover, and so it's just fun going through this city and trying to unlock all its little secrets here. Like there's tons, the Riddler's back, and so I'll just say there's a tons of like Riddler challenges in this one. Like there, I just took out a camera, and there's a bunch of them littered all the way across. So if you're someone that likes to complete like a checklist of tasks on a video game, I feel like this game would be definitely something that you can enjoy, just because there's so much going on, right? And wherever you go in the city, and that's what I love about it, that it feels like there's no wasted space. And I think that's a game design that I really like, where it wants you to take part of the world, but also it giving you a lot of fun stuff to do in it. And yeah, and then not only for like tasks to do, but the other thing too also is that it just has a lot of cool little Easter eggs, right? Especially if you're a DC or Batman fan, just looking around right now, you're gonna find a lot of cool stuff. Like, oh, there's one right there. If you see that W up there, then I come over here, and oh, Ace Chemicals. Things like that, right? That you're really gonna appreciate if you're a big fan of it. Monarch Theater, for example, over there. And God, I just love this battle system. It is so fun. And the game has like certain challenges and all that you can do, where I think just to try to perfect your fighting skills in it. And then you can use your gadgets too also. So there, like I put my gel bombs in there to use them sort of like mines. And so now, like in some cases, you'll be able to take out or counter 2 enemies at a time. Oh, I did pretty good on that one. I wasn't able to keep up my hit streak, but otherwise, I thought I did pretty good on that. I don't think I took damage in that one. And yeah, finding all the little Riddler trophies and all, it's always fun. But the bosses in this one too can be pretty cool. There's one in particular that is known to be one of the best boss fights in a video game ever, and yeah, it is. It's such a fun fight, and just again with the gameplay mechanics of it, trying to figure out how to beat the boss and how it plays into the story and all. Very clever, and yeah, absolutely one of the best boss fights ever in a video game. It's it's just you'll know it when you get to it. And yeah, and that's just part of the fun of Batman. Also, it's just getting to interact with all his rogues gallery. They're so crazy, well written, mentally unstable, and all that. That it's just fun to hear them. And yeah, again, the voice performances and all is really good on it, this game. Um, but yeah, it's out of the Arkham games. It's definitely my favorite one. I really like the series overall, but this to me is the best one out of them all. It just for me it perhaps doesn't play the best. I really like the some of the expanded moves that they had in Arkham Knight, but I just love more the overall map design of this one, the story overall. I think the payoff on this story is it's a lot better, and it just all comes together in a more better cohesive package that I just appreciate this one the most here. And yeah, and the ending too. Also, it's very well done. Creepy also, like what happens at the as the credits are rolling. I'll just say that stick around for the credits as they're playing through because it's. I felt it was a little creepy actually. um, and what I like about it too also is that some of the big roles that some of the not quite as popular Batman villains take, in this game here. I thought that was pretty cool too. It's just kind of cool to see some of their, some of those characters get their backstories or just get a little bit more fleshed out than what we're normally used to outside of like the comics and all. But yeah, Batman Arkham City, one of the greatest games for me. Obviously, I have it ranked here on my in my top 10 of all time favorite games, and it's just because it hits a lot of the gameplay beats and all and style of gameplay that I really enjoy, and that it's a great Batman game and all of this just icing on the cake for me. People, right? They could do is feed us. Coming in at number 7 is The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. So this game came out in 2015 and came out on the PlayStation 4, the Xbox One, and possibly the PC around the same time as well too. Since then, it's had ports like even on the Switch, and which is a surprisingly decent port given the hardware. And it's obviously the third game in a series since it's called The Witcher 3. And with the first 1 and 2 coming out mainly on PC, but the second one did come out on the Xbox 360. And so The Witcher is ultimately based, it originates in I believe, some dark fantasy novels from Poland, I believe. And so it's not like an original video game property, but it definitely kind of came into its own and got really popular, specifically with this game here. And so what it is, it's like an open world RPG game. Ooh, cooked them all. But it's a open world dark fantasy RPG game, and it is really probably considered to be one of the best games of all time. I mean, it's no surprising that it's, that I see this game always on a lot of top 100 lists and usually towards the top as well too. I think that, this game came out and a lot of people, it's been about 10 years ago now, and people are still wanting to come back to this world just because it really pretty much perfected the open world genre in ways that to this day we still haven't really seen. And so I guess what I mean by that is, so open world games a lot of times are, for me personally anyways, is that I think that they're really good with a couple of things. One of them being that, the world that they're luring you into, and are you going to be really engaged with the just the setting, the plot, the things to do in the game and all that. But another thing too also is that, so there's a lot of open world games sometimes where they have just a lot of like filler content. But it's mainly a lot of it's side content though that sometimes can become filler in these games. And so with The Witcher 3 though, it struck a perfect chord of having a engaging enough overall main story, but at the same time filling it with a lot of like very, very interesting side content to it. Because the overall story, and I think what I felt anyways, that I think that they got really good in this game, was that the main plot, it's good. I mean, it's engaging. It's, you're interested in finding out what's going on. The intro to the game starts off like, okay, we're doing stuff here, but it's never, at least for me personally, I felt like it wasn't really too urgent where it felt a little off, like if you go out and just start exploring the world and doing some side content. And so I say that because when I started playing this game back in 2015, it was another game that I didn't immediately like right off the bat, but then as I started playing it more and more, then I really started getting hooked on it. But then once I started hitting my groove on it, I constantly found myself not engaging with the main story and just doing a bunch of just side quests and exploring and doing some hunts and all that, and was just having a really great time. And it got to the point where I was like, I don't even know what the main story is. But eventually, if after a while, because it took me like about 3 to 4 years or so really to beat it, and it just because I would come to the game, I would play it, I would just really mess around in the game, and all just having a fun time just exploring. And eventually, I finally told myself, I was like, okay, I need to start just finishing this game. And I did. And the last part of the game, actually, I thought was really excellent. And that's where the urgency does pick up a bit on it. But other than that, though, I mean, I just love living in this world. And that's one of the things that I think this game gets so right, is that nothing really feels like filler in this game. It's all done with the highest level of quality, the highest level of writing, and the gameplay is always, at the highest quality, and so nothing feels skimped on. And I think that's why a lot of times why people keep coming back to this game, and it's just because there is just so much, nothing feels out of place and all, and everything links together to make it a very believable, dark fantasy world that you're inhabiting in here. And so basically with The Witcher, they're sort of like people that underwent, well, let's just say a certain kind of training. And if they survive the training, then ultimately they have like these almost like superpowers where that really helps them to combat monsters and demons and such. And so in a way, they're almost like bounty hunters, where sometimes people will hire them to go out and kill, monsters and such. But they're also sort of outcasts as well too. And Gerald, I don't know a whole lot of his backstory from like the previous novels and such and video games and such, but he's been through some stuff already. And in the way the game starts out is that you're in search of this girl called Siri, and So there's kind of a mystery as to why you're trying to find her and why there's this group of beings called the Wild Hunt that is after her as well too. So it's a decent enough plot, right, to get things going and all, and you're invested in it too also. And just the again, as you're just exploring the world and all, which is pretty huge. I mean, it's considerably sized, and this is just one portion of it. Um, because you can go to all these different ones, and all of them are pretty decent sized. But you're just going to run into a lot of cool things in this game, and and again, everything just feels well lived in, well structured. That again, nothing feels out of place. Because sometimes open world games, they can feel a little lopsided with their main plot, and it's like there's like a big urgency going on and all, but it's like, but hold on, I want to go pick some flowers or something. But this game, I don't know, everything just feels very organic and natural. Yeah, so whether if you want to just go after the main story or do a bunch of content stuff, but you'll probably want to do a lot of the side stuff and all, because that's a good way to build experience points and build up your character and all that. And Geralt is he's a great lead. He's pretty stoic. Doesn't really, admittedly, not have a whole lot of personality or character development. At least from what I played of this game and all. Maybe a lot of that comes from having played the previous games, which I have an understanding of them just because I've watched like retrospective videos and all that. But otherwise, you don't get a whole lot for him. He's not the most charismatic lead, so to speak, but you don't need him to be. I mean, his stoicism and all in this game is perfectly played and suits the character well based on who the character is, what he represents in this world and all. And so because of that, I actually just like him just fine as how he is. And so you can see he's carrying those two swords back there. One of them is more for just attacking, like, let's say, humans, whereas the other one is a silver sword, which is more used for, when he's fighting demons and monsters and such. And you get some magic spells as well, too, that seem to be, I mean, he's kind of had them since all the games, as far as I can see. They're all the same ones, so I'm not sure if that's just part of the that's from like the novels and all that. Not 100% sure, but either way, makes for good. They vary up the gameplay pretty good and all that, so that way you're having a bunch of different ways, right, on how you can attack your foes and such. And of course, the coolest named horse ever, Roach. When this game originally came out, it did struggle a bit in performance wise and all, but now that they've done the next generation patch where it's running at a smooth 60 frames per second, and they've done some updates, I believe, to the textures and lighting. I'm not quite 100% sure, but the game now really looks stunning, and it's more up to par. I mean, it was always a good looking game, but now it's really more on par with the, like, more modern releases, and still one of the best looking games out there. And a lot of it just comes with the artistry of just the overall landscape and how the little details, right, and all that. I mean, only really companies like Rockstar could probably rival something like this. And since it is a dark fantasy game, I mean, you'll definitely see a lot of more mature theme stuff on this game, and also not a game for the kiddos for sure. But CD Projekt Red, I mean, this is definitely the game that put them on the map. They already were building a bit of credibility with the first two Witcher games, but this one really took off. And again, as I've said before, it's a game that you're going to find towards the top of anybody's list, as it's really one of those monumental games. I would say probably within the past decade or so, I think the three games that you really see that are constantly like considered some of the best of all time is this one, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and Red Dead Redemption 2. But for me, this is the one that I feel is the best, and I think a lot of it just has to do because of the setting. I just think it's the dark fantasy thing and all. It's just, I think it's excellent and really well done in this. Yeah, the game still looks pretty stunning. So you take like the best things of something like Skyrim, but in a more, I guess, fun to control character, at least for me personally, give it a little bit more personality, and this is what The Witcher 3 is to me. Definitely an all-time great. Coming in at number 6 is Chrono Trigger. Chrono Trigger came out back in 1995 on the Super Nintendo. And it was during that stretch where, again, Squaresoft was just firing on all cylinders, coming out with just hit after hit after hit. And when we think about it in retrospect, I mean, a lot of these games were just, became all-time classics. This one, though, was interesting because they were dubbed like the Dream Team, I believe, and it was Hironobu Sakaguchi, who was the original creator of Final Fantasy, and then Akira Toriyama, who has done the artwork for Dragon Ball Z and then also the Dragon Quest series. And then also, I believe, God, I forget his name, but Yuji, I believe, the one of the main creators of Dragon Quest. So it was their three talents that ultimately formed teams together to make this masterpiece here. And it's something that at the time didn't maybe seem like too big of a deal. I mean, it was to an extent because I mean they were even being dubbed the Dream Team back then. But in retrospect, it almost seems like we would never get something like this again. Yuji Horii, that's his name. Okay, so you saw the three names up there of the main, people that put this, that were in charge of putting this game together. Obviously, there was a whole team, and because it was these magnificent creative minds that came together all at once and formed this amazing game. And I don't know if we would ever see something like that again on this level, because you also had the music from God, I had his name up there. I'll see if I catch it next time, or if you see it on the screen there. But he's also done like a lot of great soundtracks too, also. And I mean, really, when you get enough, geniuses in a room, they're gonna come up with something truly special, and that's what this game was here. And I played this game around the time that it came out. Also, I was lucky enough again to have that one friend of ours, my Mars and our brothers, that he had the Super Nintendo, and so we were hearing a lot of great things about this game. So we were able to rent it, and yeah, sure enough, I got hooked on this right away. And this is again after coming off of like a bunch of other really great RPGs at the time, but never. I mean, this is one of the most timeless classics out there. It is just such a masterpiece in a lot of different ways. And it is another game that you're just going to see amongst the top of the list of for a lot of people. And so I know that, this is starting to get a little cliche, right, with some of the games that that you're seeing up here, but it's just because so many of us were touched by some of these games, especially this one here. And it was just an adventure that we just could never forget. It is so creative, and the magic of these three creative minds that they created this, it's one for the ages, really. So what is so great about this game? It comes down to the overall story and adventure that you're going through, the concept, and it feels like you're going on an adventure, and the whole time traveling element I can't think of another game that has done it better than this one here, because it simplifies it in a lot of ways. Doesn't try to overthink it and all, and gives you a plot that is fairly simple, but it's epic in scope, because you're traversing through all the way from the very, very past to like 65 million BC or something like that, all the way to the distant future. And there's something that kind of strings it all along between, why you have to go back and forth between these time zones. And it's truly genius. And along the way, you're going to meet a lot of colorful characters, and they all have their rich personalities and their gameplay mechanics as well, too. And what really makes this game special as well is that not only the bond that you form through the story, but that also plays into the gameplay. And so I've said it before, right? And all the game that can do that, where it ties together the gameplay elements to the story elements or the theme that it's saying, it truly helps to make that game stand out. And that's what this one is. So, for example, as you're in the battle system, Yasunori Mitsuda, I think that's the composer. But anyways, in the gameplay, so you have a lot of team techniques, like, so you can pair up with one of the other characters to do like some kind of a special move, or if you can even end up doing like a triple technique. You have to earn them. Excuse me. But they're just very fun to explore like that. That's an example right there. And that's where you can do some, mega damage on the enemies and all. And so it just brings a lot of personality to the game, and they're so fun to explore, to experiment with, right, and all. And yeah, and the characters, again, I mean, they're very memorable and very unique to the time zones that they're from. I mean, you're battling alongside a princess, and then from a medieval frog to like a robot, and they are all just done in that very lovable Akira Toriyama art that is just, it's just so timeless. And I think that's a big part of the reason why this game has such a unique identity, is because of his artwork, along with so many other things, right, and all. But it really is a combination. Now that I'm familiar with some of the Dragon Quest games and all, because it takes a lot of the mysticisms and very epic scope of some of the Final Fantasy games, but with the charming adventure storytelling of like the Dragon Quest games. And it really is the pairing of both. And, back then, Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest were big rivals. And so it was just nice to see and all, right, that this game was able to blend the two worlds together. And we really got a masterpiece in this one. There's a lot of different ways you can play this game. The one that I'm showing you here is just an emulated version of the Super Nintendo, but you can have the... I actually just recently beat this game fairly recently on the Steam Deck, and that's a pretty good version there. I actually really enjoyed that version. The only thing that kind of bummed me about it is that when you're moving diagonally, the screen kind of stutters, and maybe there's a way to fix it, but I couldn't figure it out. But either way, I was able to get through the game and all, and I had a lot of fun with it that way. But I mean, there's the Nintendo DS version, which is a really great version too. I would almost recommend the Android version, but a few things about that one is that, I mean, the text, that has like kind of the more high definition, clear looking text, it seems a little off putting versus the pixelated graphics. I don't mind it too much, but what I have started to notice with the Android version is that whenever I have tried to play it on some of my more modern Android devices, it seems like it just won't play it. Or I should say, it'll play it sometimes, but then like the screen will kind of wash out a bit and all, and so it almost makes it unplayable. I started Googling it and all. It seems to be kind of a known problem, and it just never really got fixed as far as I know. So just, a heads up, right? I don't know if you do want to look at the Android version. But definitely a game that needs a re-release. I don't know why this game wouldn't come out on the Nintendo Switch. And it's the 30th anniversary of this game? Is it the 30th? 35. Yeah, it's the 30th anniversary. So, they started announcing some things on this game that led it to speculate, right, to some people that there might be some kind of a remaster or something like that and all. But nothing's been said of it yet, so I'm not really holding my breath. But for this game here, I don't know what I would think about like a remake and all, because this one is just so, it's just certain things you just want to leave as is. They were perfect in their time, and they're timeless, meaning that they can be universally loved in generations to come, almost like the movies Back to the Future. Don't remaster those, just leave them as is. Like I wouldn't mind seeing another sequel to this, just like maybe I wouldn't mind seeing another sequel to Back to the Future, but don't try to remake the same thing. They were just so perfect and timeless the way they are. And I mean, this game, because it was just the coming together of these amazing creators that made this happen. And if you try to capture that magic again, I don't know if you'll get it, because it was special to their talents and, why this game was so beloved. But so much stands out about this game, and, the music too also is just amazing soundtrack. I want to say, I think he's the same composer for Xenogears as well too. And, already talked, about that soundtrack too in a previous entry. But Chrono Trigger, it was definitely... So I've talked before about how I felt that the Super Nintendo started up pretty strong, and then there was during its middle of its lifetime, I felt it was a bit weak, but it ended strong though, like really strong. And Chrono Trigger was one of those ones that it's like, back then as a Sega kid, I was like, dang it, I really want this, But we rented it a few times with our friends, so I did get to experience it quite a bit back then. We got kind of far. We never beat it back then, but we got kind of far. So I had a pretty good taste of what this game was all about, and I always wanted this game. And it wasn't until I got it on the Wii Virtual Console later that I was able to experience it again, and then only again fairly more recently when I finally beat it on the Steam version. And it was just, I don't know, it's weird. Sometimes some games just seem so good to me that I don't want to almost like touch them, just because I don't want it. I guess I don't want to ruin the experience by me playing it. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's how I felt kind of about this one, where I was just like, oh, I don't know if my feelings are going to be the same way as I thought about it back then, because, we've had more modern games and all, and I was like, I don't know if I'm going to think about it as good as I thought it was going to be. But no, like I said, I finally took the time to beat it fairly recently, and I absolutely loved it. It still holds up to me so well that, I mean, it's here on my list, right? I mean, I have it as my number 6 favorite video game of all time. And I mean, the games that come after this are truly masterpieces for me and all, but honestly, I can switch, except for my first two. My top 2 are kind of cemented in stone. But for like the next few spaces, I can really kind of, swap these around because they're just excellent games. But there's just a few handful of things maybe that I preferred about some of the other ones, which I'll discuss here as I get to them. But regardless of that, though, I mean, ultimately, like I said, it's just a placing in a ranking of some guy. It really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, this game is absolutely amazing, and if for some reason you haven't touched it, I mentioned before that one of the JRPGs that I would recommend to a lot of people that are wanting to start out and don't mind going back to the classics. Lunar is definitely one of them that I would absolutely recommend, but this one also as well too. The problem I would have with this one though is that I almost feel like if I recommended this one at first, you're gonna get a little too spoiled because this game is so good, right? And all that. I don't know if you'll be able to go back and play some of the other ones. And another thing that makes this game really fun is that one thing that I love about retro games is that it doesn't waste your time. It's just like, it's gonna, whether it's the gameplay or whatever genre it is, and this is a good example of it. You get a very fulfilling story. It's a fairly lengthy game for what it is, and all, but it's realistic. It's actually a fairly short RPG. But don't let that fool you though, right? There is some side content to get into in this game and all. A lot of it is kind of fun too, also to explore the worlds and get and all. But it's also because there's no random encounters. There's a few battles that you do have to, that you have to engage in just because of the way the story plays out and all. But otherwise, there's no random encounters, and the story moves along at a very brisk but appropriate pace that you don't. Every moment that you spend with this game just feels earned. Like they earn your trust with this game, and and that is what I think just is so beloved about this game, that it appreciates your time. It wants to take you on this magical journey, and and you're gonna have such a fun time doing it. Because the combat system in this game too, like I said, it's super fun experimenting with all the different techniques that you can do and combine with your teammates and all that. But otherwise, it's your turn-based battle. That's very reminiscent of like the Final Fantasy games with the ATB system and all. But it's simplistic, but the strategy that you use to fight some of the enemies and the bosses is where a lot of the fun is at as well too. And the graphics too as well for this time frame. I mean, it's one of the best looking 5th generation games. Pixel art like this is timeless. It just I don't know, I guess, how like a lot of younger people will look at this, like I think it looks good, but this to me just looks stunning. I mean, like, look at this. I remember looking at this in the screenshots and magazines, and I was just like, that looks so amazing, and it still does. I just love the artistry of this game and a lot of the pixel art games from back in the day. And so there's a lot of cool spell effects. It's a gorgeous looking game. I mean, it's one of the best looking on the 4th generation. I mean, you're in for a looker on this game here. And I love how the battles also where you are just going along and all, and then it doesn't like cut to another scene, right? So you're in the battle scene now, or the battle screen. It just kind of happens all right then and there, which is really cool. But it's one of those. I mean, from here on out, like I said, if I were to try to find a flaw in this game, I'd be super nitpicking. It's just a great experience all around, and definitely find a way to play this game. You won't be disappointed. And even if you're not too much into RPGs, I think you might appreciate this one if you can give it a chance, just because, again, it is a game that doesn't waste your time. Give it a shot if for some reason you haven't. It is another one that is truly an all-time masterpiece. Coming in at number 5 is Final Fantasy VI. Had to let that little intro there play out, as it still always gets to me each time with the way that the mechs sort of show up to the town, and then the music and everything from Nobuo Uematsu. It's definitely a very effective way to open up a game that sets the mood for what the game is all about. So Final Fantasy VI, which was known as Final Fantasy III back then, and just a quick little history lesson on that. It was known as Final Fantasy III here in the United States when it first came out on 1994 here in the United States on the Super Nintendo, was because we had only received Final Fantasy I and Final Fantasy IV here. But because we never received the actual 2 and 3, Final Fantasy IV in the United States was actually known as Final Fantasy II. Then we didn't get Final Fantasy V. Then we got this one, hence Final Fantasy III here in the United States. And so this is the first Final Fantasy game that I was introduced to here. And so right off the bat, I started seeing why this series was so beloved by a lot of people. I was used to, again, more Sega games, those kind of, like the main RPG series that I had known back then was, Phantasy Star. So this is definitely a different take on the genre than I was normally used to. And I remember seeing, like, in pictures and all that of the Final Fantasy series, and I was always wondering, like, what is the big deal about these games? Well, the little cutesy sort of characters and all. It just seemed like something that I felt was a little childish. But, now granted, this game here is... It's known to be one of the best Final Fantasy games. So for this to be my first one, it made quite the impression on me. And I mean, within just like maybe about 30 minutes of playing this game, I was like, okay, I've been missing out. I want to know more about this game. And so I played it again fairly close to when it came out again in 1994, thanks to that one friend that we had that had the Super Nintendo. And so this is another game too that we would rent quite a bit. And we got a little ways into it when we first played it, but never actually beat it back then. But we got quite a ways into it, enough to definitely give me a taste of what this game is all about. And so it was just one of those games that eluded me for years that I just wanted to get my hands on. But, because, again, I didn't have a Nintendo system and all, and I was too young to purchase my own stuff. It wasn't until I was able to get it on the Wii Virtual Console. And I think you're hearing that as a theme, right? And all that the Virtual Console was sort of a saving grace for when we were trying to collect some retro video games. And even if they weren't physical, but it was, I think that why that service was popular, because we were getting older. And so we were starting to get nostalgic for some of these games that we were playing, specifically in the third and fourth generation. But what makes this game so special, and ultimately, again, with some of the greatest Final Fantasy games and all, it's going to come down to the story. And this one here probably has one of the best plots, in my opinion. And what I like about it is that it's one that it's not necessarily, where you're controlling one main character and or, you have like a lead character. This one is sort of like a team, and so you can almost say that they're all their main characters in a way. Some of them definitely have a bigger role more than others. Like I would say that the girl there in the green hair, she's probably, I would say that she is one of the more main characters in this game. But it's more about the overall party instead of just one individual, which I thought was pretty cool and all, because you are definitely, it has a really great cast of characters, and the biggest one, I believe, of any Final Fantasy game too. But the version that I'm playing here is a Pixel Remaster that came out a couple of years ago. And in my opinion, personally, it's probably the best way to play this game here. It has the cool new touches, like has widescreen support, has like an orchestrated version of the soundtrack. And also there's a certain particular scene that it adds a bit of that HD 2D look, which I thought looked really great. And it has a lot of like quality of life improvements too, also like autosave and things like that. But the story to this game is just very involving, and combine that with probably the best soundtrack in a Final Fantasy game, all of that just makes a overall package here that is just so incredibly magical to go into and experience this very epic story. I mean, the things that happen in this game that were being done on a fourth generation system is very impressive. And it's just again one of those games that there's so much I would want to talk about it, but that goes into spoiler territory. And again, even though it's a very old game, I'm trying to keep away from that from here. But the combat system is pretty fun. It's kind of like the previous Final Fantasy games where you get your ATB gauge, you wait your turn right until you can attack. But what I liked about this one is that, once you start getting into your main party, they all have a certain ability of some sort. And I thought that was pretty cool because it kept things kind of varied and all and made it fun to experiment with which character ultimately you're going to like. And then eventually you get certain, I'll just say, items in this game that let you customize them even further. But just like Chrono Trigger before it, it was getting to the point where a lot of these RPGs were starting to tell some very incredible stories that were starting to have a lot of like character depth. Because that was one of the things that I really liked about this one in Chrono Trigger was that prior to these two games, there wasn't a whole lot of character depth. Again, I mean, you would have your characters and they would go through a story arc to some extent, but there wasn't really a whole lot of exploration of their backstories or just banter between the characters and all. And this was one of the first games that started showing me that we can do that, and it just made it fun to interact with the characters that you're controlling. And with some boss battles and all, they have some pretty cool strategies too to keep things interesting. Eventually, you can get up to 4 characters. And yeah, I mean, if you get this pixel remaster version, the orchestrated version, it's really well done. I mean, it's almost worth playing again. Even if you've beaten this game so many times, just to hear the soundtrack again, it's that good. So here, you got to wait until it pops its head out. And then the best attack that I've seen that you can use again is this Magitech missile here. And it's deceased. But this really started a stretch here, and I think it started with this game in 1994. And I've already mentioned several games here, but like between this all the way to like let's say 2001 when Final Fantasy X came out, so many great stuff came out from Square Enix, or Squaresoft as they were known at the time, and I have several of them on this list. So, and I don't think I'm alone when I say that, but that it was just a time of just a lot of creativity, and the people that were behind the scenes at Squaresoft. I mean, there's a lot of stories out there about how much they overworked they were and all that. Whatever the case and all that, it definitely shows in the products that they were making. And hopefully they didn't put their health too much at risk and all, but because we got so many great games during this time, you just have to be grateful for the work that they put into these games. For me, the Final Fantasy games that I really end up enjoying is where they are able to combine really good gameplay with a really good story, and especially when the gameplay elements again link to something going on with the story. And that's what this one does here. And I think it's great when they can pull that off because everything just feels connected, everything feels purposeful. And there's a lot of great side content that you can explore to get in this game, which was kind of a first, I think, for the series, because there was some side content in some of the other ones, but this one I feel really explored that more. And without spoiling much, but there's a certain part in the game where you'll be able to explore more of the world, and just there's a lot of cool stuff that you can get out there. But yeah, this game, it's just really changed my perception of what video games can be. Phantasy Star was the most important game because it showed me just how well stories can be told in these games. And I'm a big sucker for a good story, but also how fun the games can be too, because that's a big factor in it. This game solidified it even more, and it really made me think that video games could be on another level, that could rival movies, that could, tell a good story as any good book, because you have the expansive playtime to be able to tell a good story and include a lot of detail in it and all. So it's combining like the best of both worlds in a lot of ways. And it also made me a fan of reading as well too, because you're doing a lot of reading in these games. And I used to seek out a lot of books and all that, and a lot of it comes from my love of playing a lot of these old school RPGs back then. But at the time that this came out, when I was playing it, never had I played something that felt so epic, so graphically stunning. And because just like Chrono Trigger, the pixel art in this game, a lot of the spell effects, a lot of the special effects and all, and the backgrounds and all, really were some of the best of its time. And it still holds up really well today. Like I've said before, the pixel art just holds up incredibly well. But Final Fantasy VI is just a game that it's truly magical, and not only one of the best in the series, but just another all-time great as well too. And it's on the list for a reason. Coming in at number 4 is Metroid Prime. More specifically, Metroid Prime Remastered, which is a version that I'm playing here. Metroid Prime originally came out on the GameCube back in 2002 and was later remastered on the Nintendo Switch, and that would have been in 2023, where it was shadow drop for everyone, to much of everyone's, or fans of the series anyways, a surprise. Metroid Prime. So I've already talked about Super Metroid and how much I really enjoyed that game. And I had kind of a hard time at first deciding if I was going to pick that one or this one here, because I knew that one or the other was going to end up placing pretty high on my list here. And ultimately I went with this one as I started thinking about it more, and everything that I said about Super Metroid stands with this one. As far as like, I love the level design. I really enjoy the very mysterious, isolated setting of this game that harkens back to, like, some of my old favorite sci-fi movies that are more again, not like overly creepy, but just more isolated and all. And all of that still stands with this one. But what I felt elevated the Metroid experience is that it was the perspective. Because this one here has all of those elements that, say, like something like Super Metroid had, but that you're seeing it in a very highly detailed 3D world through the first-person perspective of Samus, brought this game to a new level where it really put you in the shoes of being her, right? Out there in this lonely, isolated alien planet as you're out there trying to solve mysteries and all. And that right there alone, right, and all is kind of what really sets this game apart from, the like a lot of the 2D Metroid ones, which are amazing games, and I've already talked about those there, but that's why what I felt that this one did really good. So in a lot of ways, especially with a lot of the more older series, I tend to lean more towards the 2D versions, and that's still kind of the same for the Metroid series, but this one just got it so right when it went to 3D that it took advantage of what the 3D gameplay experience can bring. I mean, just a lot of like the graphical details and all that, right? That makes you really feel like you're in her shoes, is like the way the ice sort of accumulates on your blaster there, the rain droplets as they fall, and on your visor and all. And then I don't know if you saw it in the previous screen, but the way her reflection shows on the visor there, all of that just makes it really feel like you're there. And it's one of the best games that does that, where it's almost like feels like VR without being VR. And it does it so well, so much so that one of the versions that came out of this game that of Metroid that I thought was really well done was the version that came out on the Wii. And because that one it's basically the GameCube game, only it displays the image in widescreen, and then it has motion controls. Now, usually I'm one to like, when it comes to motion controls, but because of the perspective of this one, where it really makes it feel like you're in their shoes, and then when you're using the motion controls to do things like, not only shoot, but also look around and whatnot, it just added more to the immersion, that I really enjoyed that version as well too. And in this remastered version, I haven't messed around with it and all, but it does have the gyro control, so maybe I'll mess around with it one of these days too, because it seems like it kind of gives you a sense of what the Wii version did too. But the graphics in the GameCube one were just really ahead of their time. Retro Studios, who's the developer of this, so they came into this project here, and they had, from my understanding, they had a few things in the works, and ultimately Shigeru Miyamoto, I think, or some top heads at Nintendo, they came down and they were really impressed with a certain style of work that they had that ultimately led to being Metroid. So Shigeru Miyamoto, to my understanding, he had a hand in this game and all, as far as consulting, at least anyways. And even though Retro Studios is a American studio, and we were doing a first-person perspective on a normally 2D game, it still very much had that quality and polish that you would expect from a Nintendo game. And Metroid has never been one of their best-selling series of games, but it's definitely one that has always usually been associated with a top-quality game. And so it's something that I can imagine, right, that they hold kind of dear to try to get this Prime series really right. Hence why we're still waiting for Part 4, but, that's another story. And then also this remaster, too, which seemed to take forever to come out when it was just so heavily rumored for years. But this particular remaster here, I mean, it's pretty much the same game, but the control scheme was improved, where now you get dual analog control. And again, it adds some gyro aiming too, which kind of helps mimic the Wii version of the game. But the graphics were really well improved, and also it makes a game that was already very immersive, even that much more so with the more detailed graphics. And it really looks like something that's from like, at the very least, like a PlayStation 4 game. It's really stunning what, Retro Studios was able to do with this remaster. Now, granted, they were working off of a frame that was already really well done from a 6th generation engine, but if you're just kind of doing like at a quick glance, it looks like, a very modern game. So I'm really excited to see what Part 4 will look like and all. but it definitely continues to have the feel of Metroid Prime or a Metroid series. Because again, when this game was announced, it was, that an American studio was doing it, and it was a first-person shooter. At least that's kind of what we were thinking of. Immediately we're thinking like, oh, is it going to be like one of those, a lot of like those war games that were coming out back then? Which, I mean, that's not Metroid. That's not what this series has been all about. So there was a lot of concern. But ultimately, once, reviews started coming out and all, it put a lot of worries at ease to know that they really stuck with the adventure elements of the series. And in the end, it's still up there with one of the most highest rated games on Metacritic. Right up there with, the likes of like Ocarina of Time, which we talked about earlier. And for me personally, it is my favorite overall Nintendo game of all time. I mean, I love The Legend of Zelda and Mario and all that. And, some of their main games I've, placed pretty highly on my overall top 100 list. But something about Metroid that I just really enjoy the setting to it and all. And again, the interlacing level designs and all that I just can never get enough of. And of that style of game, it's truly amongst the best. And I mean, everything you're seeing here, right, and all like this right here, it's all running in real time. So as you can see, I mean, it looks pretty stunning. When I first booted up the game back on the GameCube, I got the GameCube specifically for Metroid Prime just because I was seeing how well it was being reviewed and all. And the moment I just was listening to this little theme here at the start, because it's more or less kind of the same on the GameCube version as this one, and I just knew I was going to be in for a very good time with a very quality product. The different visors that you can select and all was just part of the immersion of the overall experience that you have with this game, and all to really draw you into this world of this very isolated planet that you're on. And what I like about it too also is that it, like most Metroid games, it has its story, but it doesn't really spell it out for you. It's just sort of in the background. It gives you a scenario to go through. But this one here, and again, adding to the overall immersion of the game, is that you can scan a bunch of different computers and documents and all that, that if you take the time to read it, it'll give you some backstory, which is, I think, my preferred way of getting the story in a Metroid game, where it's not like a lot of dialogue or cutscenes and all that you would normally expect, where it's giving you a bunch of exposition and whatnot. It's just there if you want to read it, and if you do, you'll find some pretty cool information that just helps everything come more to life. I was also really surprised how they got the morph ball down. It controls really well. I can only imagine how difficult that was to program to get it right in a 3D space. Because one thing is 2D, right? But now in 3D, and then all the different cool things that you can do with it, like this, for example, right here, that couldn't have been easy. But they pulled it off. I mean, it's really well done. So Metroid Prime eventually ended up spawning 2 more sequels. So Metroid Prime 2, which was also on the GameCube, and then Metroid Prime 3 Corruption, which was on the Wii. And that game actually had really good use of the Wiimote. And then after that, it just kind of took a long break, as again, we're still anticipating Part 4. But this one still stands out as the best one, though. I just feel like it, admittedly, kind of like Ocarina of Time also, it is taking a framework a lot of like the way that game did for A Link to the Past, where this one takes a lot from Super Metroid. It kind of is sort of the same, only done in 3D, but excuse me, it was just done pretty well though. So, because like Metroid Prime 2 and Metroid Prime 3, it does feel like their own thing. Like it's, more unique as far as the level design and the setting and all that. But it just feels more natural in this one here. But Metroid Prime, definitely, again, one of the greatest of all time. It's one of the highest rated Metacritic games for a reason. And the level design and all that, and just the overall quality of the game, the boss fights, it just makes it for a truly great game. and one that is masterfully crafted, and one that you will get very absorbed in once you play it. One of the all-time greats again. Coming in at my number 3 favorite game of all time is Castlevania Symphony of the Night. I absolutely love this game. Obviously, right? Since it's number 3, but no, for real. This is a game that was just, there's just sometimes a game that, when you start playing it all, you're like, I feel like this game is for me.
Die, monster. You don't belong in this world.
It was not by my hand that I'm once again given flesh. I was called here by humans who wish to pay me tribute.
Tribute? You steal men's souls and make them your slaves.
Perhaps the same could be said of all religions.
Your words are as empty as your soul. Mankind ill needs a savior such as you.
What is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets. But enough talk. How about you?
Some of the greatest acting of all time, huh? But, acting aside, this is just so awesome. It's one of my favorite intros in a video game. And for those that don't know, this game is a sequel to Castlevania Rondo of Blood, which is a great game. That's a cool Castlevania game that is more of the action style. I almost had it on my top 100 too also, but yeah, it just didn't quite make it though. But basically, what you're playing here is the ending of that game. So this is the last boss battle in that game there. That's when you control Richter Belmont in that one. So, yeah, I mean, this game came out in 1997 on the Sony PlayStation. And since then, it's had some re-releases on a few different, like there's an Android version, there's a recent version that came out on the PlayStation 4, which also had Rondo of Blood bundled in with it. And some of the newer versions, they did improve on the acting. But what you just heard earlier was from the original version, and it's just, I don't know. I prefer the newer versions, but it's just fun to come back to this one with this really bad, acting on it and all. But it was part of the game's identity for a while, though. But what I love about this game is, well, many things. And first and foremost, just to say, right, with it being at my number 3 favorite game of all time, so we're starting to get really narrowed down, right, to what's left over. And when all is said and done, it's, 2D gaming is at the heart of a lot of the things that I love about video games. Pixel art, 2D gaming and all that, platforming and all. And for me personally, as far as what a 2D game can be, just, all genres and all that, again, for me personally, it didn't get better than this for me. And for many reasons, because of why I love, 2D games. One of it is, again, I'm just a sucker for like pixel art and all that. And this game is one of the best looking out there. The graphics and all, like the character models and all that, I mean, it's not too much better than, say, something maybe you can see on the Super Nintendo. But then when you combine it with a lot of the flashy effects and all that you can start doing on the 5th generation systems, and it really makes for a really, really incredible looking game. Like, you get like these cool little effects like that, right? And then, as you can see in the background there, and it just looks, it's just an amazing looking game. It's one of my favorite games of all time as far as like the look of it. But yeah, this is pretty much how the first one ends. And so there's a little thing here that you can activate. So like if you're near death, that might be kind of confusing on what just happened there. But if you've played Rondo of Blood, that will make a lot more sense. And after that amazing intro and music that just played out, which is like music from the gods, you get introduced to the most awesome 2D character to control, really, in any video game. Actually, you know what? I will say Alucard is my favorite video game character to control, which is what you're seeing here. Excuse me, on screen. Excuse me. He is just so impressive to look at with his animation, the way the cape flows and all. But more than that is also just how he feels. How smoothly and all he just sort of flows through, glides through the screen, is how smoothly he controls as well too. And so the game structure of this is a Metroidvania style. So Metroid, Castlevania, if you didn't know, now you know where the genre gets its name from. And it was really because of the main reason I got that term would be because of Super Metroid in this game here. Because Castlevania, for the most part, was more of a 2D action game. I mean, there was Simon's Quest, which was a sort of Metroidvania at the time, to an extent. At least they were trying to do that. And then the Rondo of Blood, it did have some branching paths and all, but for the most part, it was more action-oriented. But this is the one that really took it to this more adventure Metroid-style game, and so it was so well received and so well beloved by many people. Well, I'll come back to that actually, but for the most part, it was really well beloved by a lot of people, that it's where the term Metroidvania ended up getting Chryson from these two games, right? Super Metroid and Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Now, when I said beloved by a lot of people, I should back up a little bit on that. So the game was, when it came out, people seemed to really like it, but there was some opinions out there at the time from like a lot of the different news or magazines that were out there and all that they liked the game and all, but they didn't really, basically because it was 2D and all, to them it just didn't really do much to innovate and all, which is unfortunate because it was just such a masterpiece of a game. But it was during the time though where people, going 3D was a new frontier, and this game wasn't it. Even with all the cool effects that I could do and all, it just wasn't what people were, really wanting. And so because of that, there was some opinions out there, right, and all that it was just not, anything really impressive. As time went on, Castlevania Symphony of the Night has been known to be another all-time great of all, one of the best games of all time. But when it came out in 1997 and a little bit afterwards, that was sort of the sentiment back then. But I mean, when I started playing this game, we picked it up pretty, right around the time that it came out, and I was just so floored with this game. And I think one of the things that really struck out about it and all was the music. I mean, it is just such a beautiful soundtrack that it is one of my favorite soundtracks of all time.
Alucard, what is your business here?
I've come to put an end to this.
Still befriending mortals. I'll not ask you to return to our side, but I demand you cease your attack.
I will not.
You shall regret those words. Who you will meet again. What?
And though the game is, doesn't admittedly have the best acting, I did feel like those two roles, at least there and all, were pretty well. The voice of Death, I think it goes well with the character, and also Alucard, the actor. I felt that his, kind of deep voice and all goes pretty good with the game. But everything, as you're moving the character, he's just very responsive, and ultimately you end up getting a lot of loot in this game, which is always fun to see what you get and see what kind of weapons you got, as some of them can be actually really powerful, and it's just kind of fun to experiment with all the different weapon types that you get, because unlike like most Castlevania games where you have a whip, this one you can get a variety of weapons like a sword. I think you can get like a shield rod, a double-handed sword and all. And so it's just always fun to experiment with all the different weapons that you get. And you can also equip shields as well. And then you get these sort of, I guess, relics, you can say, which, they do a variety of different things. Like I believe this one here. Oh yeah, this one here will give you, like if you destroy a candle, I believe it'll give you some items now. And so you're going to go into a new area when you see this door here where that has a that's highlighted by like a red outline. And it's a lot of like the little graphical touches, like the way that font kind of appears and disappears when it's introducing you to the name of the stage. And when you do enter into a new area, it's new music, and all cool new backdrops and everything as you're exploring this pretty immense castle. And that's one of the things too also that really gets me about this game is the level design. Just like the same thing that I've said about Metroid, the way everything interconnects with each other and all, I just think is very ingenious. It's definitely one of the best gameplay maps out there that I've ever played. And there's a twist in the game that happens that without spoiling anything and all, but I think that it was just one of the coolest moments that I had ever experienced. And again, what was cool about a lot of these games back then was this is before the internet was a big deal. And so I had heard in a magazine, I think that something happens in the game, but I wasn't quite sure what. But when it happens, I thought it was very cool and something that to this day I'll never forget. Just, the way I felt when that said thing happens. But here's a kind of like a map of the overall area. And so eventually it'll fill up the whole, not the whole screen and all, but it covers a good portion of the screen and all once you get it filled in. So as you can see, it's a pretty big castle. So it's, the game is ultimately not super long, but for being this kind of game, I think it's the right length. But Castlevania, for me personally, the best 2D game out there and one of the best of all time. And granted, like I said, I'm going to be biased towards this because it's from a genre that I really like. And it combined two things that I really enjoyed, which is a Castlevania game with a Metroid-style gameplay. And that it did it so well, I was just destined to love this game from the start. And then you just get this really cool character with Alucard. And definitely makes for an all-time great. Coming in at my number 2 favorite game of all time is The Last of Us. In many ways, this game is my favorite game of all time. I played this, so this game came out in 2013 on the PlayStation 3, and it came out pretty late in its lifetime there. And Naughty Dog was coming off of the success that it had with the Uncharted trilogy, but they wanted to do something different on a different tone because things were shifting from my understanding. The people in charge there at Naughty Dog, as far as like the creative directors, I would assume, and things like that. So I want to say that I think the two main creators of this game that's kind of started the project is, I know, Neil Druckmann, and then also I believe his name is Bruce Stanley. I think I'm not 100% sure, but ultimately they came up with this game here. And when the game was first being shown,
No.
I was like hearing their voices. I'll talk about the performance here later, but when the game was being shown, at least for me personally, I was looking at this game, and the footage that they were showing of it and all. I was like, okay, yeah, it looks great. They were really nailing the graphics down with the Uncharted series. But it was another game that was set in a zombie apocalypse setting. We'd already been seeing a lot of that already, or kind of the end of the world sort of thing. And it's just, it was like, okay, here we go again, another zombie game and all. But, it still had my interest because, again, Naughty Dog was proven to be an amazing developer with their Uncharted games, the Jak and Daxter before that, and even earlier than that, the Crash Bandicoot games. So when the game came out finally, it would have been sometime, I think, in the early summer, if I recall right, in 2013. And all of a sudden, the game was just getting really good reviews. Like, it was getting almost 10s across the board, it seemed. And so reviews aren't everything. You can like a game that is horribly reviewed and vice versa. But when there is a game that is being universally praised, and not only that, but being considered like one of the best games of all time, well, you kind of stand up and notice a bit. It's like, okay, what's going on over here, right? And this was one of those games. Um, it was everyone was talking really good about it and all. So I got this game, or actually, I'll back up a bit. During this time when the game came out, I was in a bit of a transitional period, I'll say, where I had lost a job, but I was I was going to a new job, but I was also needing to move back and forth between places, and so it was a bit of a it was kind of a really hectic time for me. And while I was in the middle of all that, my brother had ended up playing the game, and he was raving about it. Like, you've got to play this game. This is really something else. And so finally, when I got all settled in, I I don't did I borrow the game from him or I bought it on my own? I don't quite recall. But ultimately, I ended up playing it. So sometime shortly after it came out, and again after I got all settled in and all to my new apartment and all that, and started playing this game. And it was the right kind of game that I needed at the time because I was just, I was just a little frazzled by a lot of things going on during then. And so here comes a game that is just very rich in its narrative, and I was able to get so involved in this story here, and it was just what I needed basically during this time. And what I mean, this I had played The Walking Dead season 1 prior to this, and so again, a lot of the certain story elements and all that are kind of the same as that one. You're a father figure crossing going on a unexpected trip, basically due to a zombie apocalypse, and you're protecting someone younger than you, like a daughter figure, right? And so again, so sort of similar. And so I had recently played that game, and I was thinking, okay, is this going to be kind of more of the same? And it is, but there is a lot of the drama that's in this game on the relationship between these two. So Joel and Ellie here, right? They're the stars of this game. It I mean the way the game is written and the plot is written and all that, it crosses this line where it's not just all black and white. There's a lot of, I've said this before I think in a previous game, but I like games and all where, and again, I think a lot of it just had to come out where storytelling in games and all was getting a bit more complex, and I think players were wanting more complex stories, and so where things weren't just as black and white. It it's trusting that the audience is going to be mature enough to try to understand more mature themes. And by that, I don't mean just necessarily like, again, blood and guts or, like adult content and things like that. No, I'm talking about, you know, the, the consequences of actions, what would you do in a given scenario where maybe there isn't really a right or wrong. It's just like, what would you do, given that everything is so distraught around you? And because of that, it was successful, I feel, in being more than just another game in the zombie apocalypse. Because again, we were just getting a bunch of this stuff, and not just on video games, also on TV. Like The Walking Dead was becoming huge around this time. The TV show, and just a lot of video games around this, concept and all. But this one, I felt really nailed the human aspect of it. Of It's not so much the plot of what's going on or why did this virus spread and all that. There's not a whole lot of information given on that. It's just more the relationship that you have with the characters, and that is why this game just sticks out so much, because you do want a good plot, obviously. I mean, you want to have a framework of where you're going with the story, but if your characters in it, if you don't care about them, then the plot just kind of loses its meaning. It doesn't really matter, I guess. And that is one thing, again, right, that this game did so well, and with not only these two characters, but just all the characters that you end up coming across in this game here. And so, what is the game? It's I mean, you can almost consider it kind of a survival horror game where you are limited on resources, and obviously you see these creepy monsters, you can say, or zombies, and so you can say it is you're scrounging for just items and uh, medical equipment and things like that, but there's definitely action in the game too, and you the way you can customize your weapons and all, and the gunplay, it's pretty decent in it. It kind of does play a little bit like Uncharted, just a little bit more slower pace and all, because again, it's the action is not the main focus of the game, but when you do need to fight, it's very, very responsive and very comparable. And so on the gameplay end, so the you're scrounging for items and all, and so then you can piece together equipment based off of the items that you find. And I like how they made it really streamlined, where it's pretty simple, right? I mean, you get your alcohol, rags, binding tape, and scissors, and you just and also the explosives, and so you combine everything and all to make certain items, like a health kit, a Molotov, a shiv, or a metal pipe with scissors on it, right? And so again, it's all very basic stuff that feels in line with what you could potentially put together, right? And in a scenario where resources are limited and all. So that part is fun too, and I like how they streamline everything. And also because a lot of times I'm not the biggest fan of crafting in video games. Every time there is some, I usually just skip it. I'm like, I just don't like doing that. But this one, and I think it was important that they nailed it, right? Because it is such an important part of the gameplay. So it's cool that they, took their time to get it right, where it's not overly complex. Because it lends well to the gameplay too, or the setting. Because if you are in a zombie apocalypse, that is got to be part of it, right? Just the limited resources. But the melee plays pretty good in this. I feel it feels very brutal, and the animations that they did for these characters when you're either punching or clubbing someone a zombie with a head with a bat or a metal pipe, it all feels very visceral and brutal and almost personable. Where the expression on their faces and all that, they really nail that part of it, where you get the sense of like desperation in the attacks almost. I think that's one aspect that they really nailed in this game, that I haven't really found another game that has the intensity of this. Like when you're choking out an enemy from behind with Joel, I mean, it feels very, very violent. But you kind of want that in this game, because it's not only the environment you're living in, but also an expression of the character himself, Joel. And it's just little touches like that and all, right, and all that I just think really brings you into this world here, and the darkness of it all.
Let me go find him. What to do? Firefly. No one taking.
There's a few little puzzles here and there in the game, nothing too complex, and it is fun exploring the world. Finding, again, you want to try to just scrounge as much of scraps and all as you can find, and because they're going to be key to survival later on. But as you're doing this, you get a lot of banter between these two, or just whichever other characters you're with, that fleshes out the world, just expands their characters, their backstories, and all that. And again, they just become very believable. The characters in this game, excuse me, are probably some of the most believable that I've ever played in a video game. I felt like I got to know Joel and Ellie on a really personable level, and a lot of that is just the writing and also the performances with Troy Baker playing Joel and Ashley Johnston, I believe. God, is that her name? I should know this. Oh my God. But both of them are just amazing. Their chemistry in this game is just undeniably, you can just tell that they were in love with the project that they were doing, and they gave it their all in their performances. And I've seen like interviews between the two actors and all, and you can just tell that they formed the bond, through the making of this that really shines through. And when you're playing the game, and that's just something that you don't always get. But it was very important that they nail these two characters just because of everything that they end up going through. The music is very good too. Also, it's sort of subtle in the background, but just lends to the atmosphere really well. The composer's name, I believe, Gustavo Santolo, something like that. I'm horrible with names, but yeah, it's the right kind of music for this style of game, and it'll just stay in your head forever as you think about the game and all, and you'll think about the music as well too, because it really helps with reliving the experience of this game. And so the basic concept of the game, without giving too much, is again, right? You control Joel here, who he's sort of a Ravager, I guess you can say, and something happened at first, and then you control him years later, and then eventually you get stuck with escorting Ellie here to somewhere, and the journey that they go through, again, the people that they meet, all the obstacles that they face, and the hardships and all, they end up, you end up bonding with them a lot, right? And again, that's part of the magic of this game, is just that experience there. And just like a lot of Naughty Dog games, this is like they were doing with their Uncharted games, is that this game does a really good job with varying up the locations that you're visiting. Because again, you're going from one place to the next, and so not only do you get a variation of different settings, but also different, the obstacles that it places for you to overcome, as far as how you're taking out enemies, how you're trying to stealth your way through a section, the characters just the people you meet on your journey along. And so it constantly feels fresh, and that's one thing that they're really good at doing. Because the gameplay, I mean, it doesn't change up a whole lot. You're either sneaking around and all that, or you're taking out zombies or raiders, and so that doesn't change. It's just scenarios that they place you in, and the cleverness of the writing around it, and all, in the stage structure and all, and the little, because it almost plays out like episode, and per episode, almost like a TV show, and each one starts and concludes in a very satisfying way, and so you're just never bored when you're playing this game, and they just got the pacing so right, that it was just one of the things that I really felt Naughty Dog was masters of back in these days here.
And they were hoping to restore the country to what it was.
And what I like again about the story is that it doesn't spell everything out for you, right? You don't really know again what happened. It's just more your interaction with the characters that really bring everything to life here.
I know, it's just him.
Now the graphics, they on the PlayStation 3, it was a looker when it came out. The detail of the textures, character models, and the animation and all that, it was truly something else. But it was a little potentially a little overambitious for the PlayStation 3, as the performance on it did struggle a lot. It tried to hit 30 frames per second, but it chugged a lot though. And I never really noticed it back then, but as I go back to that version, I'm like, oh geez, this struggles a lot. So luckily, the following year, when the PlayStation 4 had come out, we got the Last of Us remastered, and that game just looked really, it was more or less the same graphics, just had the option to run at a smooth 60 frames per second and clean up a thing here and there too. And also, it was really a nice version to play. Fast forward to, let's see, what was it, 2022, maybe something like that. I forget now. But out comes The Last of Us 3, Part 1. This is the version that I'm playing here. So I would just say, if you're looking on picking up this game, and you've never played it before, this is the version to get. It's the most accessible one, and it's looks really nice and all. But it's it is pretty much the same game. So if you've owned the previous ones and haven't owned this one, then you might, depending on, I guess, on how much you love this game and all, because so this remastered version, this third time that it was, or second time that it was remastered, it was controversial just because they didn't really, it just seemed like they didn't really add too much. So what you get with this version here, which is exclusive to the PlayStation 5 and also on PC, is you get the character models pretty much on par with Part Two. So there was The Last of Us Part Two, and in that game, for what it's worth, the game was really nice looking, and so now the game is up to par with that version there, and you get the smooth 60 frames per second. There's an overhaul of the textures and all, so everything just looks more up to date, right, with more modern standards. And it's not a huge leap from, like, let's say, the Last of Us remastered on the PS4, but again, if you've never played this game and all, this is the version again, because it does look nice, and all. And so, not taking away the hard work that I'm sure was still put into this. It's just, it kind of feels like an unnecessary remaster that was done. But because I just love this game so much, I'm not mad also that they did it. And so, of course, I picked it up. And yes, I'm probably part of the problem on all this. But like I said, I just love this game so much. And they probably did it also because there was a TV show that came out of this that was, that I'm sure that they wanted to capitalize on. But The Last of Us, when I was playing this game, so kind of the same with like the Walking Dead one, is that it brought out a certain fatherly instinct in me. Boom. That I feel that it, in a way, started helping me prepare for eventually that I would become a father. And there's certain things that on how the character Joel is to Ellie that I sort of take to heart when I try to interact with my own daughters. And so I mentioned in The Walking Dead that there's a nickname that the main character has for the little girl that he's trying to protect. Well, this game also kind of the same thing, and it's the nickname that I have for my older daughter, and it's based off of this game here. But yeah, I mean, the journey that you're going to go on this game and all. I mean, it's such a well done story that there was a reason why it eventually ended up becoming a TV show, and the TV show itself was pretty popular. Well, season one, I should say, and it's just because it was based on the structure of this game here, and it just really is just a well told, very cohesive, tight script, and it pays off all the questions that it asks in a way that is very heartfelt, emotional, brutal. You're filled with anger sometimes, you're filled with hope, but it never is, but it's relentless in the sense that anything bad can happen at any time. And that is illustrated pretty early on. And so as you're playing the game, you are always on edge, just knowing that something can happen really bad. And the impact of how they make those scenes play out is really, I mean, it lingers in you, like almost like a lump in your throat that you're just so uncomfortable with it. But but that's kind of the cool thing about it, is that that's sometimes life. And I love games that aren't afraid to be very brutally realistic. That don't try to sugarcoat things, because that is life a lot of times. And sometimes I like media that reflects that. Doesn't try to insult our intelligence. By trying to pander to us or trying to sugarcoat things. And I felt that this game did a really good job of that there. But yeah, I mean, if I have any complaints with it, the game is a bit linear. There's not a whole lot of, extras on it, I guess you can say. But it is, but the journey that it takes you on is more than worth it. So sort of like Final Fantasy X, and all, where it's you don't want to sacrifice more open-ended gameplay at the cost of like, the really good tight story that it tells. Okay, I was like, okay, what am I doing here? I almost forgot. But yeah, and again, without giving too much away, but the ending, it, I love stuff and all where it ends on a way that it leaves you questioning a lot of things and the impact of it, because it's so like it's simple and it's complicated and all, and at the same time you're just left like bewildered, like, okay, what just happened? Or and it's been discussed. I mean, if you don't know anything about it, just know that after you beat the game, there is a lot of great discussion out there as far as what happens at the end and how it all and plays out and all that. That you will have a really fun time just trying to, you know, get yourself involved in all that in that discussion too, and just know that a lot of us were there where it wasn't just all spelled out for us, and so that's one of the beauties of this game is why it has such a lasting impact too. It's because it asks very hard questions of you, and yeah, I just absolutely loved it. Oh, the sound effects too also are really good. But yeah, The Last of Us, I can keep going on and on about this game. It's, I've never played a game that was so, I mean, it was almost like I had a certain desperation playing this game. And I say that in the best way possible, that I just never knew what was around the corner. I was, just so hooked by the intense gameplay and the story that it was telling. And again, it just doesn't let up, where you're always in danger, and really made you feel like you were there with these two characters. And then everything that, as you're eventually become caring for Ellie there, and you just are so immersed in this story that you just can't help but say, wow, thank you for writing something so impactful and all, and that hits on a lot of different things and themes and all that it eventually is something that goes beyond video games and into the higher echelon of storytelling. And that is, I think, what the magic of video games can be. And at number 1, Final Fantasy VII. Every time the topic of Final Fantasy VII comes up, I kind of get a little giddy that there's just a lot that I want to talk about this game. And so I might be here for a little bit as far as just trying to express why this game is my number 1 favorite game of all time. So I'm going to try to organize it a little bit as far as like breaking it down to, just graphics, story, a little bit of background of the game, my personal history with the game and all that, to try to keep things organized so I'm not all over the place. But this game, I just never get tired of it. This game came out in 1997, and to this day, I am still so flabbergasted by everything that this game is. And it's actually a game that I have some criticisms of. It's not a perfect game by no means. I would say that the games that were probably at least like 4 to 5 games that were before this are probably technically more closer to being objectively a more perfect game. And again, even though it's all subjectively, because there are some things about this game and all that just, that I said before that sometimes there's some games where you're like, oh, I got to do that one part. This game actually has a few moments like that. But the highs of this game, it just overshadows any complaint that I have with it to make it just something that is just the most magical, awe-inspiring piece of media that I've ever been able to play, watch, whatever, right? It's just, to me, it's just that damn good. And thus commences the bombing run mission. This introduction here, and I mean, they say first impressions are everything and all, and there's so much I can talk about, and I'm not going to go too into detail as far as like what I feel about the overall story, or like, talking about in depth about it. I'm just going to sort of play along a little bit here in this first little structure here, but there's a lot that this setup does in this game, that it establishes a lot of things all at once, introducing you into this new world in a way that is very fun, fast-paced, in your face. Let's go. First of all, Cloud, or you're this. Well, you don't know his name is Cloud yet. You're this dude with a big sword, and it says ex-soldier. What is that? Well, you're gonna find out here soon. But right off the bat, you're on some kind of a mission apparently. And the music that kicks in and all by Nobuo Uematsu. I mean, this is definitely not my favorite score of his. That honor goes to Final Fantasy VI for me personally, but it's still definitely a very memorable and one of his greatest soundtracks. So you're getting some backstory here, and I'm just going to kind of skim through this again and all, because again, I don't want this to be kind of more of a in-depth story discussion and all, but you're starting to figure out, okay, you're working for this team. They seem to have hired you for something. And then you get introduced to Barret. When this game came out, I mean, it was in 1997, and I think it's already been kind of the popular thought is that Final Fantasy VII was you can probably say like the first big AAA game that was out there. The game was very expensive. I mean, it was the most expensive game to my understanding that came out at the time, but it was one of those there where they really threw the money at the right thing in places to make this a quality product. I mean, you can just tell that there's a lot of love put into this game here, and that is one thing that I really miss about game designs back then, is that, you know, games are expensive nowadays, and games were, I mean, not as expensive back then and all, but it just seemed that there was still a lot of like labor of love that they were trying to make with a lot of these products, and all, even if it was costing a lot of money, where nowadays it just kind of feels money just being thrown at things just to throw money at things, and ultimately you come up with a product that just feels very disjointed and almost soulless. This game here, I mean, it was definitely made by a big team, and it was, you know, when you beat the game, you start seeing all the names attached to this game that made the game. And you know, and at least back then we were realizing like, oh, we're coming up into the big leagues now. This is almost like a movie, but it was still made by people that really cared, though, you know, to make a good game. And so, what makes Final Fantasy VII for me so special? Okay, so I'm going to try to structure this out a little bit. So first and foremost, again, kind of starting with the graphics here, and I'll just say the presentation overall. So the game hasn't aged quite as good because it came out during a time where technology was just rapidly increasing. So when it came out in 1997, and so we got it in September of 1997 here in the United States, at that time, it was a very impressive looking game for a lot of the different techniques that it was doing. We had already seen games that had the polygonal characters with the pre-rendered backdrops, but the way, like you saw earlier, how the camera sort of shifts up, you know, and gives you a view of the reactor that you're in and all. I mean, that was all very impressive stuff. And granted, it's all for show, but it still felt like big money, you know, big budget goodness, though. Again, this is a time where when a game was expensive, it could back it up with good quality. Not always, still, even back then and all that, right? But it just seemed more that would be the case back then than it is now. But still, though, it was, like I said, it was a very impressive looking game, and a lot of the backdrops and all were just really fun to look at, as every location was different. Where we were coming from, even like Final Fantasy VI, which was an amazing game. I love that game. I already talked about it and all, but it was still a lot of the, you know, like the caves kind of looked the same, the towns kind of looked the same, the overworld kind of looked the same. Where this game here, you know, because every scene is like a different pre-rendered backdrop. Well, not everyone. They do reuse some assets, but for the most part, though, a lot of it is different. And so it was just really fun to get to visit all these different locations, just because you knew you were going to see a new area. And so, you know, the sort of chibi style characters that they use here and all, it's, you know, I still find a certain charm to them, but they definitely haven't aged the best. But where the graphics were impressive, though, was in these 3D, you know, in the battles now that are on 3D now. And because now the character models that are used for this perspective here, they look more mature and more proportioned to like a real person. And they have some pretty good detail, cool detail on them. Like you can see the tattoo there on Barret and the sort of ground shading around the polygons and all that give them kind of a full look and all. And the animations were pretty cool too. And it runs at a pretty slow frame rate. I mean, I'm thinking, 15, 20 frames per second. But again, back then it wasn't something that really bothered us in a game like this, because everything else was just, you know, looked like it was just made out of money. And what I like about this one is that even though it went to 3D and all, and it doesn't quite have the, you know, the fast pace of the battle systems like some of the 2D games, it still felt really responsive enough and all that you didn't mind it too much. Unlike, like, for example, like what I talked about in Final Fantasy IX, the battles in this one seem to move at a more rapid pace and all, and so it just makes it more fun to, you know, to go through the battles on this. You know, it doesn't waste too much time, basically. And you get your classic tunes there and all that. Has a great battle theme. But another thing that I liked about it too is that most of the Final Fantasy games prior to this were based in medieval, sort of a medieval setting. which again, not against that and all. It's just that we had been seeing it a lot at that time, and so this one kind of goes for, part 6 was already starting to do it, but this one leans more into the sort of cyberpunk, sort of steampunk setting, and I really dug that about it. I mean, you're like fighting corporations in this one and all, and it just felt a little bit more grounded, I guess. Obviously, still very fantastical and and very fantasy-like, but with a little hint of realism and all that I think was crucial to try to captivate a more modern, audience at the time, or the more, casual audience at the time. But yeah, the enemy variety and all, and the battle scenes look really great. And it was just really impressive seeing this in 3D. We had already had some RPGs in the 5th generation before this game came out, like Suikoden and all, but this one, I mean, it was just something to behold. I mean, we really felt like we were in a new generation here, and Squaresoft was sort of leading the charge on it. But now going on to sound. So again, the sound effects and all are well enough. They do their job. They still sound a little kind of almost 16-bit, but I was still fine with that. But the music itself, though, is just it's just such a memorable soundtrack. So many songs in this and all have become very iconic to the series overall, and it was with some of the best tunes. But it's on its own, not all the songs really land well as far as, if you're just listening to them on a casual playthrough. But when you put it in the context of the game, though, like this song, for example, with sort of like almost industrial sound and everything, and it just fits so well with the setting here. And that's what I love about it, is that it fits the game like a glove, and it helps so much to bring the overall atmosphere of this game that it's trying to evoke, right? And it's just the game and the soundtrack just go hand in hand. I don't know how else to say it, I guess, but it's just it'll become just, you're going to be listening to this music in your head for a while if you get into this game. And so then going on a bit about the story to this game. So Final Fantasy VII for me hit the right mark as far as like having a very impressive story. I mean, I thought part 6 was excellent, and some of the things that happened in that game I was just so dazzled by. This game has even more of those big moments and all, but it's not just about having big moments, it's how everything fits into the story, and because you care about these characters. Because to me personally, this cast of characters, Cloud, Barret, Tifa, Aerith, Cid, Yuffie, Vincent, Red 13, and even Cait Sith, just my favorite gang of characters in any game of all time. I love this crew. I love the diversity that they have in not only their characterization, but in their gameplay and all. And so it just it's the perfect blend of like the characters having a kind of more realistic look to them, than previous Final Fantasy games, but still keeping that fantasy element. So again, you have a talking cat dog or whatever Red 13 is, and then you have the animatronic of Cait Sith, and then you have Vincent, which is like I won't spoil him, but again, definitely leans into the fantasy elements of it all, and so that's what I love about it. It's still very rooted in the fantasy elements of it. But what ends up happening in this game is you start off in this town that's very, if you've seen anything about Final Fantasy, you've seen the backdrop of the city Midgar that you're in, and so it is just a very cool location. And there's so much that happens in Midgar at the start of the game that once you end up leaving Midgar, at least for the first time that we played the game, we were just so impressed of like, that's just like the first few minutes, the first few hours of this game. Like, what else is out there for us? And well, we sure found out, and it was just just getting to see what the overall scope of this game was, just very impressive. the game came out on 3 discs back in the day, and they really filled those discs up with content. And one of the things that really stands out too also is, well, the villain, Sephiroth. Not going to go into him too much, because again, for anybody that hasn't played it, but I mean, this game has one of the more known plot twists or story moments of any video game. So it's not really so much of a mystery of, what happens and why he's considered to be, one of the more popular villains out there. But he definitely puts a stamp on this game that makes it just that much more memorable, right outside of everything else that I've talked about that's already really good about it. If I have any complaints about as far as like the story of the game and all, it's just that there are certain moments where it tends to drag a little bit and all, but at the same time, when I think about it, they were moments also that are trying to expand the backstories of the characters and all that. So actually, really, in retrospect, it doesn't bother me that much. But the finale of this game is truly something special. It really is. It's the way this game ends. And again, because it's one of those endings that just makes you question things and all. And I love that kind of stuff where it's not all spelled out for you. But yeah, I mean, what I remember about this game when we first got it, so my brother, I believe, ended up buying the game. And so this buddy of ours that previously I talked about that had the Super Nintendo, so he was more his friend. And so at the time when this game came out in 1997, they were already out of high school. So they were working, they were young adults already working. And I was like, let's see, I would have been, a junior? No, I was a senior at this time. And so when the game came out in September, they would work, and I believe they worked, I think they worked a swing shift job. And so they would get off of work late, and then they would come over to the house and all. And I was already trying to get some sleep. And so we shared a bedroom. And so in the middle of the bedroom, we had a TV with a PlayStation on there. So what I recall about this game a lot is, or at least during this time when we first got the game, is that they were a little bit ahead of me as far as where they were playing it. And so they would sneak into the room. And again, I'm there in bed, lying down, trying to get some sleep, while they would be playing the game with the volume kind of low. And while I was kind of in and out of sleep and all, I could hear them playing, and I could hear them say things like, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened. Like, oh, Raul is going to shit his pants, when he sees this. This is like the coolest thing ever, and I'm hearing this. I'm not seeing what's going on. I'm hearing it because I'm acting like I'm still asleep. And so I would get so excited to see, what I would play, because they would play a section, and then the next day after school, I would play that section and kind of get up to speed to where more or less where they were at. And so then when I saw the moment that they were talking about, I was like, oh my God, that was so cool. So, I would, so basically I would wake up in the morning, go to school, but I was I just had it in my mind, like I was really anticipating to come back home and play the game just so I can see what had happened. And yeah, I mean, the game just has so many cool moments in it and all that are just mind blowing. And I just, that was the other thing too, also, that was just really building up the hype. It's just hearing their reaction to it and all. And then, then the next day I would get to play, whatever they went through, until finally we more or less beat the game around the same time. And, I mean, the just the ending to it and all that. And, I mean, with probably the coolest song ever in a video game. It was just a perfect way to, cap off this amazing experience. So I have this version on here. I'm not going to talk too much about the remake of this game. I'll save that for another version, as the jury is still sort of out on that one there as far as what my overall thoughts are going to be, because I have to see it all the way through, basically. It's kind of where I'm at. But suffice to say, though, I am very much enjoying it. It's just that I have to see it all the way through, because I think a big part of my overall thoughts on that whole trilogy is going to come down to how it ends. And, we're still waiting for the final, the final part of it, which I'm gonna hope it comes out in 2027, but we'll see. But a cool thing about this game too, also though, is that there's if the graphics are a little dated for you, there is if you get like the PC version or like the Steam version, there's a lot of cool ways that you can mod the game to make the graphics look better, run at 60 frames per second. It upscales the resolution on the backgrounds, and just has a lot of cool other tweaks to it that you can do that really makes the game almost like a remaster of this game here. And if that is pretty sweet to play, and it also adds voice acting, which it's not the most professional voice acting. Again, it's just mainly fans that are doing this, but it's still pretty well done, and it's actually my preferred way to play the game. I still come back to this game and I still enjoy it, but after playing that modded version, I'm like, okay, this is pretty sweet. And so I'm so glad that that exists out there, because I have just a really cool way of playing the original version still. But the story that Cloud goes through and all, I mean, he's probably one of the characters that I just related so much to, that I really gravitated towards a lot, especially during a time where I was a teenager, 17 years old, almost becoming a man. And a lot of things about, I've always really learned to like a lot of stories that have to do with like self-identity and things like that I just really related to his character a lot. And it really helped me, even to this day. I still come to Final Fantasy VII and all, because I think about like the struggles that he goes through and all that, and helps sort of mirror sometimes the struggles that I go through, and just gives me a bit of inspiration to try to, overcome any doubts that I have within myself and all that. And again, without getting into spoilers and all, the overall development that his character has and how he grows as a person in this game, it's just something that was really well written. And I feel one of the things that makes Cloud not only one of the coolest characters out there in a Final Fantasy game, but also one of the more relatable ones as well too. So him and Squall, I really gravitated towards their characters in Final Fantasy 7 and 8, that made me appreciate these games just that much more. But this is another cool little effect here that, I thought was pretty cool at the time, because it's all pre-rendered, a still backdrop, but it can still have certain animations there, like the way that fire is sort of flickering there. But Final Fantasy VII, there's so much I can say about this game, and I want to do sort of like a hype session on when once I start kind of knowing when part 3 of the remake might start coming out, that I really want to go a little bit more into depth as far as like the development of the game, and this version, and then eventually the remakes and all that. And I might even touch on some of the stuff that came out in the compilation of Final Fantasy VII. It's not going to be like a super deep dive with like, where I'm super accurate with my information and all. It's just kind of more of a casual sort of like overview and history of Final Fantasy VII, and just to sort of hype up the release of the new one. But yeah, this was the start of the game. It opens up in a big way. It does, obviously have its slower moments and all, but still though, it's just this intro here that I just played here, I was already really liking it up to this point. I just had no idea where it was going to take me and how much it was going to change my life. Because at the time, I was starting to write some, and I was thinking of a story. I wanted to write like a fantasy story of some sort, but I just didn't quite know what direction I wanted to go with it and all. And but it was just like always in my head, and I felt like I was trying to be a little too over ambitious with it and all. But once I played this game, it did two things to me. The first thing that it did, it's like, I don't even know why I'm trying to write. I can never write something like this, because it hit so many beats and all that I was almost like trying to think of. It's just that maybe I was too young, or I'm just not quite as talented and all. But this one just sort of let me live out an experience, that something that I felt that I had in my head if I was just more talented, or more, maybe if I was older and all that, I can think of more things. But after that, I really started doing some more writing and all that, and a lot of it came from inspiration from this game, directly and indirectly. Like, there was a fantasy story that I was writing at one point, and eventually the main bad guy, admittedly kind of takes a lot of inspiration from Sephiroth. but even more indirectly, right, with some of the themes of this game and some of the more intimate moments in this game, it gave me a lot of just imagination and thoughts and inspiration and all on some of the things that I would write, as the years went on. I haven't done much of that now recently and all, but there was definitely a time though where I was really into just trying to write stories and everything, and nothing had ever inspired me more than this game right here. Later. Final Fantasy VII, my favorite game of all time. I would say that if you haven't played this game for whatever reason, and if you're into RPGs, you can play this version here, which is pretty much available on everything. And definitely check this version out, like I said before and all that, right? I'm all about, you checking out the original version. And this one has a lot of quality of life features as well, too, also, that you can get into, that, makes the experience more easier and user-friendly. But if the graphics are a little too dated for you and all, but you don't want to quite jump into the remake, then, like I said, if you're into modding and all that, there's a really cool way you can mod this game. Just check out Final Fantasy VII Seventh Heaven on Steam, and you'll see what I'm talking about. It takes a bit of tinkering to mess around with and all, but it's not too complex. And I think you'll be really impressed with the results of just how much you can improve the overall experience in this. But yeah, this was fun to do, talking about my favorite games of all time. And this is the one that takes the cake on it all. Just such an amazing experience, and I'm so glad that I got to experience this game when I did. I'll never forget it, and it's a game that has just lasted for me for years and years and years, and I'll always happily come back to this universe.